So thank you for joining us for our Spring 2015 JYN Reflections Dinner. As you know, my name is Carly Henry, and I'm the program coordinator for the Junior Year Abroad Network as of halfway through your semester abroad last spring. So thank you for helping me transition into my new role and kind of laying the groundwork for this semester, which has helped me prepare for my first full fall semester here at Georgetown and hopefully you guys for your senior year. So I hope it's going well. We're pleased to have you join us and hear more about it. So as Professor Banchoff had mentioned earlier, the Berkley Center is going into its 10-year anniversary in 2016, and the Junior Year Abroad Network has been around just as long as the center has. So we're very grateful for your participation. We have had nearly 500 students study abroad since the program began, and in last year alone, we had 55 students in 23 countries across 5 continents, which is the largest congregation of JYN students we've ever seen in an academic year. So thank you so much for helping make that possible. It was one of our most successful years, and it's really laying the groundwork for future years to come, so I appreciate your assistance in that. At your seats is the 2014-2015 annual report, which features blogs from each of you, as well as fall participants, some of whom we have here tonight, and also some photos throughout the year. So I encourage you to take a look at that. That copy's for you to keep, and I also have extras if you would like it. So please feel free to share that. We're very proud of it. There's also a PDF copy on the website, so thank you for helping make that possible. Also at your seats is your award letter. If you could please complete that, that will help us begin the process of submitting your stipend payments. Our business manager will be in touch this week with a few more documents and further instructions, but this will get that started so we can go ahead and issue that to you. So I'm now going to turn the microphone over to my colleague, Melody Fox Ahmed, who is our Assistant Director for Programs here at the Berkley Center and has been involved with the Junior Abroad Network far longer than I have. So she's going to lead a conversation with 3 of our students, Lindsay, Nick, and Rachel, and just have a few minutes to discuss their experiences abroad and then open it up for some reflections from you, and then we'll continue our dinner conversations from there. So please continue enjoying the food. I do want to thank Professor Seaman for being here with us tonight, so thank you for joining us. Many of the professors unfortunately have classes on Mondays, so Melody and I are here to lead conversations with you. So I'll turn it over to Melody. Thanks.
Thank you, Carly. Let's give her a hand. It's great to see you all. And I know many of you knew my colleague Erin Shevlin. She's actually up at Boston College now. She sends you all greetings. This is really our favorite program at the Berkley Center. I think this is like my 9th or 10th dinner like this, and I always love it. It's my favorite topic. I love reading your blogs, and you really have no idea how much we read and share your blogs. And we do this thing at our annual retreat every year where we post like the top hits that they get on our website, and they're always a JYN letter. Isn't that right, Carly? Like, they usually have some provocative title, like sex is in the title or something, so that might help, but really, like, people really are reading your posts, they're sharing them far beyond what you may know, so thank you for sharing your writing. Since the program started in 2006, it's really evolved, it's become more rigorous. We have a pretty rigorous application process, so we do not accept everyone who applies, so you should feel very proud to have participated. Your writing is excellent. We've seen some really great blogs, a few examples of which are up here today, so we're going to hear a bit more about it. Professor Tom Banchoff, who is our director, who came up with the idea for this program, who had to leave, he just mentioned briefly, I was at the Parliament of World Religions 2 weeks ago in Salt Lake City, 8,500 people. I didn't speak to that many people, but the ones that I did speak to about our work, they were so interested in JYN. They took all the publications, they're reading your writing, people from all around the world. They were like, how can we start this at our university? So you guys are really models, and just thank you and congrats for all your great work. So I studied abroad in 2001 in Spain, and I just arrived, and then 9/11 happened. And I was sitting at the table in my little Madrid piso with my señora eating lunch, and we were watching like some news station that we always watched. And we saw the second plane slam into the tower, and I was like, what the hell is that? Like, is this a movie? Like, is this a joke? And I ran down next door to the internet cafe that was next to my apartment, could not get on, like CNN, like everything was just down. You couldn't call the phones into the US, and this was like pre-Facebook, like before everybody having cell phones. Like, it was absolutely terrifying. And then they our program told us, I went to Vanderbilt, like we were not allowed to walk around in groups of Americans. We weren't supposed to speak English. We had to like lay very low. There's just a lot of hostility, a lot of tension. So I always think about that when I'm reading your letters to see what has changed and what hasn't. And it's just really fascinating that every year students go abroad. It's often it was my first time abroad. Except I'd been to England, but to a non-sort of English-speaking country, to see what your first often encounters are with another culture, with another religion, how globalization is affecting the world. So these are just topics, we'd love to discuss. Carly did a great job dividing your letters into these different themes that you see in here. So we'll talk about some of those on our panel, then we'll move to discussions at your tables. So, we'd love to hear your honest stories about what you experienced. So now, it's my pleasure to introduce our panel. We have Lindsay Horikoshi, who is in Ecuador. She wrote some really interesting blogs. One in particular that I loved was she kind of took on John Oliver, who was making fun of Rafael Correa, the president at the time, just a really astute cultural commentary. She also worked at the State Department. She interned at the embassy in Peru, which is a very, no, in Ecuador, a very unique experience to have while abroad, so we'd love to hear about that. And we have Nick Cortina, who is in Spain. He was in Salamanca. He is interested in linguistics, globalization, the predominant use of English in Spain and in Europe and what that means. He wrote a great post on Francisco de Vitoria, who wrote about many of the human rights, rights of man, natural law that we take for granted now, but were quite new in, I think, 16th century Spain, dealing with indigenous rights. So really interesting post as well. Rachel was in France and Morocco for the whole year. She wrote a post, that's one of my favorite, on aggressive hospitality, like being accosted in a market by a very well-meaning woman that also was a little bit scary. I think many of you have experienced something similar. It was, in fact, a theme we picked up on in the report. She talked about language switching, cultural diversity, and in France, kind of the protest culture, the rise of the National Front. So really interesting blog posts. So to get what we're going to do is I'll ask one question. We want to hear from each of the panelists. And would love to hear from the group as well. So we'll just go through a couple questions to kind of get a room conversation going. They're going to be our folks to kick it off. So I'd love to hear how you thought the Junior Year Abroad Network enhanced your study abroad experience. Say you hadn't done this, how might it have been different? And what did you learn and how did it add to it? And so you can grab that mic and talk into it. That'll be great for the video. Nick.
Can you hear me? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was at the University of Salamanca in Spain, as I'm repping on my sweatshirt. So it was my first time abroad. I'd been studying Spanish for a very long time, but it was my first time ever, actually immersing myself in the language and Spanish culture in a Spanish-speaking country. So I know study abroad for everyone is a very intense process full of culture shock, but for me it was especially. I feel like study abroad is a huge whirlwind of experience, and it can be difficult to really take the time to reflect on your experiences. So through the JYAN network, the JYAN program, it really kind of afforded me the opportunity to sit down and critically think about the experiences I was having in like a kind of more scholarly way, which I thought was great, instead of just, some people write blogs about their experiences for their family, but this was kind of trying to engage with different issues in a deeper way. So yeah.
Something else about the program that I really appreciated was the group aspect of it and the commenting on other people's posts. I was in it for 2 semesters, so I had 2 different cohorts or groups. I'm not sure what the terminology would be, but it was so interesting to see people's experiences and the ways that they were experiencing similar things to what I was and different things from what I was in their various countries. Some countries that I'd been to before, some countries that I'd never really even thought about visiting before, but are absolutely on my list now. And the fact that I had I not been in this program, I wouldn't I knew a couple of the people in my group, so maybe if they'd posted something on Facebook, hey, I wrote this, I would have looked at it. But for the most part, I didn't know these people, and so I would have had no reason to know their experiences. And it was a really nice way to get to know more of the Georgetown community and also get to know parts of the world that I hadn't been able to experience.
One thing that I really appreciated about the blogging experience was that I was able to hear about the diversity of people's study abroad experiences. I think at least I sort of had this concern going into my study abroad experience of whether I would be doing it the right way. You know, was I immersing myself enough? Was it okay that, you know, I spoke English sometimes versus, you know, not always speaking Spanish? Was I traveling to the right places? Was I traveling too much or not enough? And, you know, reading the blogs, I actually got to see that there's no one right way to do study abroad. You know, some people, I mean, just talking amongst the panel during dinner, you know, some of us did independent programs, some did Georgetown-led programs, or like a mix between the two. And you can learn so much from all of those experiences. In terms of travel, I mean, for me, I didn't leave Ecuador the entire 4.5 months I was there, whereas some people, you know, went to a different country every weekend. And you know, there's so many different ways to approach a study abroad experience, and I think reading the blogs and hearing how different everyone's approach to study abroad was just makes me more excited to go abroad again and do it, you know, differently next time.
Yeah, I think we'll make it interactive from the get-go. Does anybody in the audience want to comment on how JYN enhanced your study abroad experience? You don't have to. We can also do that later. Okay. Think about it, ponder it. We'll come back. Okay, panel. So the next question is, what and how did the peer blogs from around the world illuminate about your own host country and study abroad experience? And what was, say, the most interesting and surprising thing you learned from reading a peer blog?
I guess I'll start this round. One of the blogs that I commented on, which I thought was absolutely fascinating, was written by a girl who studied abroad in Japan and had visited Okinawa, and blogged about her visit there. And I found this really interesting because basically my background is that my family is from Hawaii, but originally, you know, many generations back is from Okinawa. And Okinawa has this very kind of unique culture that's a bit separate from Japan, historically, and then kind of today, like in the geopolitical sense, there's a lot of tensions because of the presence of U.S. military bases in Okinawa. And, you know, it was kind of her first experience reflecting on sort of these issues surrounding Okinawa, and I found it really like fascinating to kind of reflect on that myself, looking at my own kind of like experiences, because I also lived in Japan and saw some of these things firsthand, but it was something that I hadn't thought about in a long time. And so that was just one example where I really got to re-encounter something that I, you know, was very passionate about through, I guess, someone else's perspective.
Yeah, so one of my favorite aspects of the program was, of reading other people's blogs, was seeing someone talk about a phenomenon in their country that I also observed in mine. And that, an example that especially comes to mind is, I read a blog about like increasing secularization in Japan, and that really resonated with me in my experience in Spain. You know, you think of Spain as one of the most Catholic countries in the world, but I read a lot and kind of observed that it was really more in name only. So Salamanca especially would have these like, has these very entrenched traditions of this very distinctive procession during Semana Santa, That's kind of intense and kind of jolting to see. But you would think that, given that they're so that the public would be very religious also, but it's really not a lot of people actually go to mass. So it's just it was interesting for me to ponder this phenomena of keeping these religious traditions maybe just for tradition's sake, whereas like the relevance of them might not be in the forefront of everyone's mind nowadays.
One blog post that really stood out to me was about experiencing the Jewish High Holy Days in Argentina. Actually, not from somebody in my group. I read other people's blog posts because they were all really cool. And it was really fascinating to me to see sort of the security mechanisms, what it takes to be welcomed into the community. But at the same time, the girl who was writing talked about how she was welcomed into the community. And I am doing thesis research on Judaism in Morocco, so that was something that I had been looking at. So the fact that this entirely unrelated, like I wasn't reading these posts expecting to see something related to my thesis, and it's Argentina, which is very different from Morocco, but some of the things she was talking about are also things that I had observed or read about in my research. So it was interesting to see this, how certain themes are present across different cultures.
Yeah, the cross comparison of themes is absolutely fascinating. When we're pulling the excerpts for the letters, we find that. I'd love it if on the website maybe like we'll ask you for some feedback on the website and how we can improve the program. If we could search by themes, it's tough because there's so many letters now, but maybe one cool thing we're doing is an interactive map, which I think is almost ready. Launched today, fabulous, where you can see where everybody is studying and click on it and go to the letters, I think. But it's like a cool piece of code, which is like really hard to do. I don't know anything about, but our web developer did it, so look for that. But yeah, if you have ideas for how to improve the way things are organized, let us know. We meet with a lot of students who are thinking about study abroad, and if they say, oh, I want to go to Morocco, we're like, look at the website. Like you will find so many letters that will really give you an insight into this country. So it's really great to have that. What about you all? Any things that jumped out at you from reading your peers' blogs, things that surprised you, disturbed you? You can be honest. It's a safe space. We can edit this, like it won't all be public.
I was just gonna say, in a very similar vein to what Lindsay was saying, I was born in Copenhagen, and I'm Danish American, and I think it was Sarah who studied abroad in Copenhagen, and reading some of those blogs and a couple of other people's as well. It was really it literally brought a smile to my face to see people, because I know Danish culture and I know sort of what's normal there, but to see people sort of experiencing that for the first time was really funny. Like weird things, like from how crappy the weather is to like how nice the people are and genuinely happy they are all the time. How expensive things are there. So that was really fun and I think kind of unique to this blogging experience.
I also really loved. Sure. I'm Alejandra. I did a split year. I was in the Dominican Republic in the fall and in Spain in the spring. And one interesting part of the blog was actually reading about my host country from the perspective of other students that were abroad at the same time as I was. And then I thought, oh, they'll probably be experiencing the same things as I am. But Celia, who was also in the DR, had a very different experience as a Black American than I did as someone who has family from the Dominican Republic. And so it was kind of interesting to get an outsider's perspective on something I felt so inside and a part of. So similar to hearing about maybe like Copenhagen was for you, that's how I felt in the DR. But also Nick and I were both in Salamanca together. And I think, who else? Samantha was also in Salamanca. And so the three of us were writing all different stories about the same place that we were experiencing at the same time, which I thought was very refreshing and was helpful to read during the program because it exposed me to things that I wasn't looking at before. So, yeah.
I'm Sarah, so I was the one in Copenhagen. And I Andrew Tabus, who I don't think is here, was in my group, and he wrote about Charlie Hebdo and the shooting that happened, like right when he got there. And then while I was in Copenhagen, there was also a shooting that was essentially like mirroring what happened in France. So I had already read his post, and after the shooting happened in France, I went back and reread it, just because there were a lot of similarities and the local people's reactions. So that was really interesting for me.
Hi everyone, I'm Kira. Just to kind of build on what Sarah was saying, I was actually in France with Andrew. We were actually in the same location in Lyon, France. And so, you know, the first week that we were in France was when the Charlie Hebdo shootings occurred, yeah. So it was kind of an intense introduction, I guess, to our broad experience. But it was really powerful. There were three of us in France who were also part of, you know, this group JYAN, and we all wrote about it. And so there were two of us from Lyon and one from Paris, and it was a very powerful experience. Yes, yeah. Oh my gosh, your blog was amazing. I was like in tears, because you had spent a significant amount of time in Paris. Is that right? Oh, yeah, well, oh my gosh, just everything about, oh yeah, now we have a photo of, you know, some of the vigils playing in the background. It was just, again, it was like a very powerful experience and like kind of a sense of solidarity, both like with the French people and with Georgetown students in France. So that was, yeah, that was quite valuable. Thank you for sharing.
First, can I just say you're all so articulate. I'm so impressed. So I teach for the American Studies program in the college, great major, really enthusiastic students, one sitting right here. And when they usually start the major sophomore year and say, I really want to study abroad, but are we allowed? Because it's very US focused. And we practically kick everybody out the door and insist on studying abroad because there's this idea, and W.C. Smith, theologian, wrote about it extensively, that you can't know yourself until you know the other, some other culture. So I'd be really curious just to hear about moments when all of a sudden you reflected on, for those of you who grew up predominantly in the United States, when you had a moment where you thought, oh, wait a minute, maybe this, you know, wasn't the only way or the natural way to do something. And you started to question the way that you were raised, if you were raised here in some profound way. I'd love to hear if those moments happened, and if they did, when and where.
So I'm Liz. I'm an American Studies major, and I answer the question all the time, like, why were you abroad? And I was in Brighton, England, and I took American Studies classes in England. And so I guess my moment for that, I wrote about it, was we were talking about the Declaration of Independence, and I have, you know, that has been beaten like a dead horse. You know, you do it in every single social studies class from when you're little all the way up until like the semester before you leave in Civ. And so talking about that, I kind of come in with a very strong perspective. Like, I know the Declaration of Independence. Like, this is my thing. And the professor, I was the only American in the class, professor would put me on the spot a lot of the time. Like, oh, can you tell me about this from the American perspective? Which was also kind of strange for me, because it was like, I have this one very narrow, limited perspective, and something we talk a lot about in American Studies here is even just how my perspective as being from New England is different from someone from a different part of the country. So to kind of be the American perspective was weird a lot of times for me, but then also just kind of sitting back and like letting other people deconstruct the Declaration of Independence in front of me and things like that, and just kind of like watching other people come at it from a very, very different perspective was something that I think I kind of would have taken for granted if I hadn't really stopped to think about it. But stopping to think about it made me kind of come back with a very different perspective.
Hi, sorry. Hi, my name is Rio. I studied abroad in Budapest, Hungary last semester, and towards the beginning or like the middle of my time there, I think the refugees crisis was starting to like build up. And we received a bunch of emails from our study abroad program advisor, like warning us about like not to go on trains or like not to like go on trips near the Hungarian border just because there were so many like refugees like coming in. And I guess just growing up in America and being an immigrant myself, it was really interesting to see the like similarities between I guess the idea of like welcoming immigrants slash refugees into the country, especially when I was talking to my like other Hungarian students and um, like our Hungarian like staff like professors and staff members, and it was really interesting to see how like they were all like very well. I feel like in America there are a lot more people who are welcoming towards immigrants, while I found that in Hungary a lot of mostly everyone was just like xenophobic and like no, we can't let them in. But yeah.
So one really interesting experience I had happened over breakfast at my host family's house. Every single morning during the week, the TV was always on in my household, and every morning when I ate breakfast, the same show was on. It was called Direct Contact, and it was where some journalists would interview some politician or ex-politician and just ask them about current events and their opinions. And one morning, the U.S. ambassador happened to be the person getting interviewed, and I started freaking out to my host family because I was like, "Hey, this is like my boss on TV. Like, let's see what he has to say." And what he was talking about were economic sanctions on Venezuela, which was something that like hit the news pretty hard in Ecuador while I was there. And obviously he was presenting the U.S. perspective, which is where I was coming from as an American, and as working at the embassy in the State Department, and talking about why there was a need for the U.S. to impose sanctions, and his concerns over like the political landscape in Venezuela. And I mean, to Ecuadorians, this was a little shocking because Ecuador, at least the president of Ecuador, likes to pride himself on kind of following in the footsteps of the sort of like leftist views that the Venezuelan president has taken. And so, like from almost like a very like my host family was not very political. Like they didn't really care about most things. But I love to talk about politics all the time, and so they like engaged me in conversation when I was interested. And so it was really interesting to watch kind of their reactions to this, because Venezuela is viewed in a very positive light in Ecuador, but from the American perspective, we don't like Venezuela at all. And so it was super interesting to kind of watch the U.S. ambassador talk on TV, and then like having that conversation with my host family afterwards.
Yeah, a lot of you wrote about those juxtapositions. Like you wrote about being in like a bar eating like callo, like a soup of like stomach, and like listening to, who was it? Taylor Swift. I'm like, okay, I'm not in America, but I kind of feel like I am. Anybody else have those interesting tidbits of the kind of clash of cultures in your host country? We can think some more. Okay, so my formal question to the panel is, how has your study abroad experience, and specifically your participation in JYN, influenced your experience back at Georgetown in and out of the classroom? To deepen that a bit, I think, at Georgetown, we always talk about the concept of formation. Who are you becoming as a person through your college journey? How are you impacting the world for good in terms of social justice, in terms of encountering the other by understanding the other, welcoming the stranger, and making an impact in the world, the Jesuit values we hear about. So maybe if you want to talk about how you feel, not only coming back to the Hilltop has been academically, but how you've grown and changed as a person. And if there's any specific examples you want to raise, that would be good to share in here.
So, like I said, my experience in Spain was my first time abroad, so I think it was very much a huge journey of personal development. I think it just made me much more confident. It was my first, I navigated 5 different countries pretty much by myself. My first time speaking, immersing myself in Spanish, and you know, kind of getting the validation of all my years of studying that language. So for me, I think it really also, this is kind of obvious, but it really just broadened my perspective and made me realize the importance of being incredibly open to embracing new relationships and not really, you know, like taking challenges in stride, because when you're abroad, a lot of challenges pop up. And to survive and thrive, you have to just kind of roll with it and learn from them. So I think that's a viable perspective that I'm taking back with me, which again sounds obvious, but you is really instilled with you after going abroad.
So I've joked with some of my friends that while abroad, I learned to have an opinion, by which I mean before I went abroad, and still to an extent, when people would ask me, oh, what do you think about this? Instead of saying, this is what I think, I'd say, oh, well, on this side, it could be this, and on this side, it could be this, and just a very wishy-washy. It wasn't always because I didn't have an opinion. It was just because I didn't really want to step on toes, and I could see merits to both sides, and even if I identified more with one side of a debate, it still was easier to just say, oh, well, it could be this or it could be this, and then the other person usually had a strong opinion, which is why they were asking, and we could just talk about that. But while I was in Morocco, my host parents, who were both very educated, politically aware, globally aware people at the dinner table, liked to ask my opinion on things that were going on in Morocco, in the United States, and in the world. And they would not accept, well, it could be this or it could be this. They'd say, you're right, it could be, but what do you think? And why do you think that? And that, my host mom especially, was part of the Moroccan feminist movement in the 1970s or late 70s, early 80s. And one night said to me, you realize that as an educated woman, it is your job to have an opinion and to be able to back up your opinion and to be willing to tell people that, because by not giving an opinion, you're making it seem as though, you know, maybe you think your opinion doesn't matter. Maybe you don't think that the other person really wants to hear your opinion, and neither of those should be the case. It is your job to have an opinion and to tell people that opinion so that they can see that a woman can do this. And
right on.
Yeah, she was great. But so just hearing that and having that reinforced every night at dinner. So, Rachel, what do you think about what's going on in the news today? Definitely affected my behavior in the long term, I'd say.
So for me, I think I had a slightly different study abroad experience from a lot of people in the sense that I had 2 different jobs while I was overseas. So a lot of my experience was almost like like learning about myself in a more professional environment. One of the experiences, as I mentioned before, was working at the embassy. And so it was actually really fascinating to kind of jump into this world of the Foreign Service. As I was mentioning to Melody, people assume that because I, worked at the State Department and like am interested in international affairs that I'm in the SFS, but I'm not. I'm in the NHS.
I should know because she's worked here for like 4 years, but I still ask her that.
And so, I'm not someone that's ever considered joining the Foreign Service or really having this long career like representing America overseas. But I had an extremely positive experience. And I actually worked in the public affairs department, which is sort of the front-facing office at the embassy, in which it's the only section that works directly with the Ecuadorian population. So it was a lot, like my office ran like English language programs and scholarships for Ecuadorian students to study in America, and like really trying to form like a positive view of America overseas, which is not something that I'd thought of before, at least in terms of diplomacy. I always assumed that, diplomacy happened in these like closed door meetings between like ministers and secretaries of state and things like that. So I guess this experience really kind of changed my perspective on what kind of like career I want to pursue, and how I might be able to do some really cool work overseas. And I don't think I'm going to apply to the Foreign Service like out of Georgetown, but it's definitely something that I want to keep kind of like as an option in the future, because I had a really cool experience. And then on the other side, I was working, volunteering with indigenous populations in Ecuador after school. And this was a really eye-opening experience for me because I really had never, I've lived overseas before, but I lived in the middle of Tokyo, Japan, like an incredibly wealthy area surrounded by expats. And so I never had the opportunity to interact with, with a population living in a very resource-limited setting. And, the work that I want to go into is in development and things like that. And I wouldn't say that the project that I was working on had any sort of like impactful long-term sustainability, all these buzzwords. But it was still a really important experience for me to see how, so many people live around the world that's so different from the way that we live every day. And I mean, had I not had this experience in Ecuador, I really would have not removed myself very much from like this Georgetown bubble, because the school that I went to, the host family that I lived with, the embassy where I worked, they all had very, everyone was very wealthy, or at least by Ecuadorian standards, and traveled a lot and had all these worldly views. And it's completely different in this indigenous community where there's no running water. The people scavenge for food out of the trash. Like, it's a completely different world that I'd never interacted with before. And it really gave me kind of like the tangible experience to move forward with and get me to like do more in that environment.
Thank you. Anybody else want to share? I was really struck by your honesty in the letters. Like, you took up really difficult issues like race, gender, harassment, being a minority in your culture and how you dealt with that, perhaps for the first time. Anybody else want to share anything? There's some also really fascinating stories, like in the archives, like one young woman I remember converted religions when she was abroad in China and was like really honest about that. Somebody else like connected with a refugee. I think we heard this story last year at a camp and like ended up like getting him, he couldn't come to Georgetown, but I think he went to Canada somewhere, like mobilizing and like getting a whole support network to support this refugee student to come to the US. So, even if like you haven't done something as extreme as that, like I think this experience resonates, it'll, change who you are. And it's interesting because you have this record kind of forever online, as Professor Banshoff was saying, which seems scary. Like, I wish I had blogs from 2001, like, when that happened to me, being there for 9/11. I had a journal, but it's like totally different. Actually, we hear from students now who are like, actually, I want to take that post down. Like, I've changed so much, obviously 10 years later, you change a lot. And we actually really push back. Like, we say, well, first of all, we kind of own it because we paid you, which is true. So you are writing for us. And secondly, like, why do you want to take this down? Like, what do you not like about it? And if you have a really valid reason, like you have a super high security clearance and you're, working, in sensitive affairs in Morocco and you can't have something critical up, then yes, we will take it down. But we really try to work with you to figure out like what you don't like, why you don't want it, et cetera. And the majority of them are still up. But I think it's great that you have this record and can really, see in 10 years how you've changed because of it. Yeah.
I definitely want to just touch on a lot of what the panelists have said, that in the short term, a lot of what I ended up writing about kind of became the seeds for my current thesis that I'm working on right now. And so it's great to have firsthand experience and observations that are, I don't know, kind of feeding those thoughts rather than just reading something in a book because I witnessed it, and then that natural curiosity that came of it is what pushed me to want to write about it. But I will say, in the long term, it definitely shaped my career path. I said, well, I loved being abroad, and while I love being an American citizen and I love my life in the United States, I can see myself doing this multiple times in the future, and hopefully maybe like building a life around that. And how do I do that? So while I was abroad, just because it's our junior year, you start thinking, okay, well, I'm going to graduate next year. What can I do? So that pushed me to look into the Foreign Service, a lot like what Lindsay was doing, and saying, how can I interact with different cultures on a regular basis and have it be my job. So that was a great formative part of my study abroad experience.
Requirement that's coming in next fall, 2016. Like, what are ways Georgetown, the Berkeley Center, other centers can work better to kind of capture what you learned about difference, diversity in very many forms: race, class, religion, ethnicity, sexuality, you know, cultural, et cetera, and bring it back into the classroom. So, you know, we try by connecting you with faculty, by having an event like this, but there may be other things we can do, because, you know, Georgetown, we have this Doyle Engaging Difference program that JYN is part of, and I think we're always trying to think about how we can expand it and connect better with what you guys are doing and learning and want to see happen on campus. So ideas are welcome. You can share them now or email us. And also just any thoughts you have about how to enhance this program in general, we'd love to hear. You don't have to say it now, you can also email us, but feel free. Anybody? Everything was perfect? Nice. Nice job.
Hi, I'm Rio again. So I thought something that was really interesting while being abroad is finding out that, or like figuring out how to deal with like everyone else's perceptions of Americans. Like, well, first of all, when I was in Hungary, no one believed that I was American. They would all just be like, "Where are you from?" And I'm like, "Oh, LA." And they're like, "No, like you're not." But yeah, so that was kind of weird. So I would just by default, because I was born in Indonesia, my family's Indonesian, I would just say Indonesia every time someone asked me, even though that's like not really true. Um, and it was interesting to like to see that even when they did find out I was American, they automatically assumed like, "Oh, like America's a rich country, so you must have a lot of money." When that's like not. I mean, I feel like that may be true for some people, but like it is not always true. So I don't know. It was just really interesting dealing with like people's perceptions of like America and like how your nationality can often influence like I guess people's perceptions of you, your identity.
Yeah, and I think that building off of that, one of the things that has been most valuable for me going abroad is trying to figure out what it means to be American when you're abroad, and how do you best, for me, best representing the United States also, but being able to represent difference and diversity within the United States. And so I know that one of the things that was really challenging for me being abroad was like the other having conversations about the United States with students from I was in Denmark, and there were also other international students that were living with me. And so we would have these conversations, and I would often hear the other American students being like, well, in the United States, it's like this. And they would be saying something that was very narrow-minded as well, and it was very specific to their hometown or their home state. And I was like, like I feel very, very uncomfortable that you're saying that as a representative of like everything in the U.S. when that's not my experience either. And so figuring out how to navigate that and to have cultural exchange with people from other countries, but also to be fair in the way that you're talking about your own country. And so I think that one of the things about this is we are often reflecting on things that we see in another country, but that it's also important to reflect on where that's coming from our own perspective, what we're bringing into it from the United States and our experience. And it's not necessarily a complete contradiction or that there's these two poles, but there's like this very much of a spectrum in between.
Class wearing a hijab and their entire life is explaining Islam, even though they grew up in America or they're from here. So you're suddenly put in that position of having to explain America to everyone, and it's very challenging. Good. Anybody else?
So your second question was about how to improve the program for the future. And so this is half an answer to that and half a question of if this program exists. So I'd be really interested in like returning and doing more research about France and about laïcité and issues like that. And I'm wondering if there's a tie-in of ways to do some kind of like Berkley Center post-grad program that links up with the JN experience.
We have some undergrad opportunities to do research, but you all are seniors, right? Yeah. I'm really interested in doing an alum thing. Have any of you heard of the Interfaith Youth Corps? It's like an interfaith dialogue organization. They have like thousands of alum now, and they have like a big pot of money where they fund projects, they fund research. Like some of your work actually could fit into this. Like you can apply to them, even if I think it might be true. I think you could all count as alumni of IFYC if you have a tie with the Berkley Center, because we work with them, and like there's this larger initiative called the President's Interfaith and Community Service Campus Challenge run through the White House. So kind of like by default, you can all say you like do interfaith service work by having done JYN. So anyway, you can apply to them and they'll fund your projects, but I would love for us to do that. So let's talk to our boss about that.
Another thing that made me think of is we're always, with this being our 10-year anniversary, we are trying to strengthen our alumni network, but we do have this this network of faculty commenters on the blog. And while I'm sure come this time next year when you've graduated Georgetown, you'll be very busy with your careers, but it may be a good opportunity to maybe engage JYN alumni in past blogs so you can see how future students are having similar experiences to you, how they may be completely different, and then potentially having some people who participated in that in the past help comment on blogs. So thank you for suggesting that.
Yeah, and the tenure is key. So we want to have an opportunity for students to present their research on religion, world affairs. There's this sort of focus on violence, peace, religion, which is pretty broad. So if you're interested in presenting your research this year, probably in April, let us know, because there will be a forum to do that. And maybe we can sponsor you in other ways to continue that. And we're happy to advise, or any of our faculty advise, like as you do Fulbrights, as you apply for jobs. We have a really large network of folks in this field in DC. We're happy to connect you with them. So just because you're graduating, you haven't left, you're still part of the Berkley Center family. So keep in touch, keep us posted on what you're doing. Anybody else? Any comments, questions, closing thoughts? No? Well, let's thank our panel. Thank you for your thoughtful answers. And thank all of you guys as well. Thank you. Thank you, Carly. Carly, you want to say anything in closing?
So thank you again for helping transition me during my first semester here at Georgetown, and then coming into your program kind of halfway through after you had already just started it. And so I appreciate your patience, and also teaching me a lot about how we can improve this program through your experience, and then also just tonight hearing your thoughts. So that's been incredibly helpful. I look forward to seeing a lot more wonderful blogs in the future, but also staying in touch with you. So we will be reaching out to you about our 10-year events and things of that nature. So stay tuned for that. But I appreciate you joining us tonight. I hope you enjoyed the food. Oh yes, Wednesday is a big day for us. We have I don't know if you know, but the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees will be here. So I know a lot of you talked about the migrant and refugee crisis that you experienced while you were abroad, and that's continuing very much now. So the High Commissioner for Refugees will be here on campus for an exciting, as part of his U.S. tour. So it's at 4 o'clock on Wednesday, and I organize that. So you'll get to see me there on Wednesday. So hopefully we will see you all there. It'll be in Gaston. So it'll be about an hour and a half program of a lecture, a moderated conversation, and then an opportunity for Q&A for you to share potentially some of the experiences you had, ask questions on how they relate, which would be wonderful and really enrich the program. But we will have a day kind of full of different events. And so earlier that day in the Healy Family Student Center at noon, we're doing a film screening. It's with a documentary filmmaker who's flying in from California, and the UNHCR office has endorsed this film. So they're supporting it. So it's going to be a film screening. It's about a 50-minute documentary. One of the first kind of groundbreaking experiences where a filmmaker was actually able to be inside a camp and talk about those experiences that people are experiencing firsthand. So it's going to be a great showing. There will be pizza, so we can feed you again this week. And then it'll be a Q&A with the filmmaker after that. So that's at noon in the Healy Family Student Center social room. So lots going on this week, so hopefully we'll see you there. But feel free to talk amongst yourselves. I'll come and grab your paperwork so that we can get your stipends processed for you, and then take home these wonderful publications that you guys really did make. We have extras as well if you'd like any, but thank you for joining us tonight. So congratulations on a good semester.